The president's speech Wednesday, his announcement of the decision to pull back from the brink of war with Iran.
The American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world.
Here is what Ashley and Phil Rucker wrote for the Post after that speech. Quote, Trump's handling of the Iran crisis is in some ways epitomizing his presidency, with his remarks containing striking contradictions and remaining open to interpretation. He was at once unyielding in his rhetoric against Iran building a nuclear weapon, while open to talks with its leaders and pushing to involve NATO allies in diplomacy. You watched that speech. You've reported on the president for a while. What does it tell us about him at this moment? Is it Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hovering over his shoulder? Is he now a hawk, or is he still a non-interventionist in part?
The president at his core in many ways is whatever people want him to be. Different people can listen to that speech, from Republican lawmakers, from Secretary Pompeo, from world leaders around the globe, parsing every single word and hear what they want to hear. I do want to stress this was the president's speech. It was written with input from a number of people, but he was making edits in the Oval Office right until he went out, and that's one of the reasons he went out about 15 minutes later so into the grand foyer. But if you watch it, what was striking to, many things were striking to me, but one thing was he came out, the first thing he said, he walks out, he's sort of silhouetted in golden light, and he says, while I am president, Iran will never get a nuclear weapon. And then he kind of paused, so that's the tough talk, that's what he wants to convey. And then he kind of pauses for a second, straightens his arms and says, good morning, and then gets into the meat of his speech, which is much more conciliatory and offers some, simultaneously while talking very tough on Iran, also says Iran could be a great nation. We look forward to potentially working together to fight ISIS, and I look forward for peace and prosperity for the Iranian people. He addresses them directly for the Iranian leaders. So you can take away whatever you want from that speech, but the final key thing is what the Iranians could take away was there was nothing in that moment that they absolutely had to respond to. He had taken the off-ramp, and he had not escalated it in a way where they felt to save face or for any other reason they would then have to respond.
Well, this is the dichotomy of this president, right? He wants to be the tough guy, but he also doesn't want to get, his promise was to not get into these wars in the Middle East. So he's stuck in this situation. And part of the twist on this is that folks on the Hill, you had Lindsey Graham there earlier, there's a lot of people on the Hill who want him to be more aggressive in the Republican Party. They think he's held back too much. So they were happy to see this. So you have that whole wing of the party who's happy to see him being more assertive in this area. It's a difficult juggling act for the president. And in those remarks, I think he seemed somewhat anxious about how this was all being interpreted.
What about Iran's juggling act, its response? What do you make based on your reporting of how Iran has responded to President Trump, and what's next for them?
So it initially depends on whether you believe they intended, when they launched about a dozen ballistic missiles at U.S. military installations, whether they intended to kill Americans and cause significant structural damage or not. We've heard mixed messaging from the Iranians on this. We've heard the United States say that they intended to do so. If you go, regardless, we're at a point where that didn't happen and they haven't escalated. And so I think the challenge for Iran is they have faced criticism internally that they didn't do anything more aggressive, that they weren't able to respond in a more aggressive way. They've been critical.
Will they respond aggressively to the new sanctions?
I mean, we'll have to wait and see. There are two kinds of responses. There's the response from the military, openly and acknowledging it, and there could be a response through their proxy forces and paramilitary forces. And so those are the kind of responses we have to look for. I think the challenge they have is they're under incredible internal pressure, in part because of the economic sanctions that have been imposed, and in part because this was just months after protests asking for reforms in their country. And so if it's seen that they didn't respond in a way that was in kind for what they saw as the act of killing Qasem Soleimani, we may see military responses either directly or through their paramilitary forces.
And the larger question is, what does the president want, right? What is his larger strategy? We've already engaged in a deal, in a negotiation as a country with Iran, and got a pretty robust global agreement from Iran, and it seems like their internal political dynamics are not going to allow for another negotiation. So he says he wants to negotiate, but the deal that America got last time, while imperfect in many respects, did achieve many of the goals that he says he wants to achieve. They were winding down their nuclear program. They had eyes on their kind of nuclear facilities. So what does he want? And that's not clear to me still.
Well, we're in a re-election year, Ashley. What does it mean for how the president sees his re-election strategy, his re-election message? We showed Senator Warren earlier. We see the Democratic race somewhat scrambled by this entire episode. Senator Sanders ascending in Iowa in the latest Des Moines Register poll. Vice President Biden underscoring his experience.
Well, some of the Democratic candidates, including Senator Warren, have sort of gone up to the wag the dog line. And I think the one thing I think is the
president did this on purpose.
Yes, to distract from impeachment. I think it may very well have had that effect. You remember we all went into the holiday break focused on impeachment, and we came back from the holiday break focused on being on the precipice of war with Iran. But having covered the president for 3 years, I don't believe he's sort of a master of strategic distraction. I think he does things that do distract, but they are often
master of distraction.
Yes, but they are often not as intentional as some people like to give him credit for. But what was interesting was, the president is generally, with certain notable exceptions, anti-intervention, right? That was something he ran on. And he does have this fine line where a lot of his supporters feel that way as well. A lot of the people at his rallies, it's their sons and daughters who are serving overseas. And so in talking to voters in Toledo last night, they said pretty overtly, we don't want to go to war again in the Middle East. We don't want another messy foreign entanglement. We don't want to get into a war with Iran. But to a person, we support the president. We think he's being tough. We think he's
sounds like Matt Gaetz, the congressman
exactly
from
demonstrating
Florida.
peace through strength. And so it'll be interesting to see how the president finesses that as we move forward.
But I do think that what Ashley said is part of the reason people are skeptical of this, because without the explanation, a good explanation, actually I thought you gave the explanation that the administration should have given and stuck with it. But without that, everybody's like, why now? Why now? So without them having a good reason for why now, everyone is skeptical.
Because they don't want to be seen as just doing it for deterrence reasons. That appears clear based on your reporting.
Well, and again, I think they thought that the strike was the message, and there just didn't seem to be a layout in terms of how to explain this to the American public. This was decisive, this was overt, this was done in Baghdad, this wasn't done through, example, a CIA strike. This was designed to send a message, and I just don't think there was a thinking of it. And so what you heard over the course of the week was several explanations. I mean, at one point they stopped using this term imminent threat because it wasn't working. It reappeared today. And I think it's a reminder that when you're doing things based on intelligence and these sort of, and you can't talk about it, the messaging becomes all the more important. That strike was not a way to speak. It might have spoken to Iran. It told part of the story, but you needed an explanation behind it, is the takeaway, I think, this week.